All right, so what lifts are the best tests of strength? So, it's been agreed that powerlifting, the lifts in competitive powerlifting, measure total body strength the most accurately, and that's the squat, the bench press, and the deadlift. Those are the three best tests of strength. And I'm gonna add some other lifts later that are good tests of strength, but I'm gonna add out of the power lifts. This is my opinion. I would say truthfully, bench press, especially if you have a strong bench press, you're a strong human being. No whatsoever. You're just very strong if you have a strong bench press. And what is for normal people, a strong bench press is 315 pounds. Then you're strong if you're the average Joe. But when you want to get into above average Joe, you have to bench like 350 or 365. But what is considered actually strong, that it takes a lot of work and good genetics and being strong to get there, 4 or 5 pound bench press or 400. But or like above 400, like 425, 415, 450. And then if you want to say you're a freak, you're just strong no matter what, bench press 500 pounds. But the minimum really is 4 or 5 bench press. But if you bench press 500 pounds, you're just strong whatsoever. And then you get to the 500s. And then you get to a 585 pound bench press. You're just a mutant. You're just a freak in nature if you bench press 585. And bench pressing 600 and over, you're just one of the strongest people on the planet. Even bench pressing 585, one of the strongest people on the planet, or as minimum as 500 pounds. But 600 minimum, you're one of the strongest humans in the face of the earth. But the strongest people ever, they're bench pressing 650, 675, 700, or over 700. So if you bench press over 700, you're just one of the strongest men on the planet, hands down. If you bench press 700 and over. And there's only like a handful of people who have bench press 700 and over in competition or even in the gym. And I'm talking about raw. Yeah, are allowed, elbow wraps are allowed, but even with that, it's only a handful of people. But fast forward on the bench press. And bench press, in my opinion, really, especially if you're in the 600, 700, close to 800 range, that's really makes you the strongest human ever. The strongest bencher ever, next to equipped Jimmy Kolb, one of the strongest raw benchers too. But strongest raw bencher is Julius Maddox. Julius Maddox is the strongest raw bencher in the face of the earth, and the strongest raw bencher right now is Julius Maddox, and he's a really big boy, 6'3", over 400 pounds, a lot of muscle mass, raw muscle mass, and he's just very strong, benching over 700 routinely, even 8 plates, 765. And most he did in competition was 782 or 783, and he did 796 in the gym. And he barely trains squat and deadlift. He does it to maintain. He did like 615 for 10 reps, completely raw, no belt, no knee sleeves, nothing, and over 700 pounds, completely raw. And he deadlifts like over 700, maybe even 800, beltless. And he's a bench specialist. Yeah, he could squat and deadlift over 700, and probably could get to 800 if he trained it, or over 800 if he did like a few cycles of squat and deadlift training. And he's probably Julius Maddox with his bench press and his size and all. And he's strong on the shoulder press too. Over 500 pounds. He did 573 seated. And Julius Maddox, he's probably just statically one of the strongest men in the history of the earth. considering his bench press is miles ahead of everyone, and his squat and deadlift without trying over 700 pounds or maintaining over 700 pounds can easily get to the upper eights, maybe even low nines. But and there's a video of Julius Maddox where he just grabbed like a 180-pound or around 200-pound guy, grabbed him with one hand, palmed him on the wall. No other human has done that to anybody that size. So you know how brute strength he is. So that's what happens when you bench press well over 700 pounds. You're just brutally strong. Another lift, which is number 2 on the list, or tied as number 1, would be the squat. And for the average Joe, squatting 315 is a good beginner squat. But the average Joe who goes to the gym, a 405 squat is a good squat. Raw, that is. And similar to like a 350, 365 bench, squatting 500 is like the equivalent. But similar to a 400, 405 bench, squatting 550, 565, 560, 570, 585 is similar to a 405 bench, squatting between 550 and 585. That's when you know you're a strong squatter. Or if you want to bench 405, maybe somewhere between 405 and 450, squatting 600 or low 600s. Like somewhere between 350 and 365, and maybe a little over like 375, 385 is a strong bench. That's like 500 to somewhere between 550 on squat. That's for the average person to be considered stronger than the average person. And like a 315-pound bench press is a strong bencher for someone who goes to the gym. That's the equivalent of like a 455 squat or around then, or low 400s. But yeah, if you get to 600 and more, maybe even 585, you're a strong squatter, hands down. But if you get to like 650, 660, 675, 685, 700, you're just a strong human being, one of the strongest people on the planet. Get into like 675 to 700 on squats, that's like more or less a 500 bench. And especially if you get to like 725, that's like 500, low 500s on bench. And if you get to like 635 squat, that's like more or less a 450 bench. And so if you squat over 700, get to like 750, 765, 785, 800, you're strong, period. And then get into like 800s, you're very strong. I mean, you're freakishly strong if you squat 800. Most lifters will never squat 800, even 700. But that's the start of freakish strong. And then if you squat 900, 1000, you're just in a league of your own. 900 squat is like benching around 600 raw. And squatting 1,000, that's like a 700 bench. Only a handful of people squatted 1,000 raw. And people like Ray Williams, the strongest raw squatter in history, in sleeves, he did 1080 in sleeves. He is considered the strongest legs in human history, squatting 1080 in sleeves, and he has really giant quads. And he's one of the strongest men on earth. He was one of the strongest powerlifters in one time, at one point, but he has some of the strongest legs in human history. And even to this day, he still worked up to above 1,000-pound raw squat in sleeves. So Ray is one of the strongest in history, and you have to be immensely strong to squat over 1,000 pounds raw. One of the strongest people on the planet if you do that. Okay, so deadlift. You have to be really strong, period. But I'm gonna stick with conventional because conventional is a better test of strength than sumo. In deadlift, that's just the reality. Sumo's more technique than strength, even though it takes strength. Don't get me wrong. Sumo deadlifters, especially those who squat a lot of weight, have decent bench presses. They're still really strong lifters. There's a lot of them even stronger than me. But conventional is a better test of strength. Better test of strength, conventional deadlift. But there are some sumo pullers who still squat a lot of weight and bench alright, or some even strong benches. But with deadlift, it's out of the three, it's the most leverage based. Some lifters squat a lot of weight, overhead press a lot of weight, and bench a lot of weight. Lifters like Derek Kendall, and their deadlifts are less than even their front squat, like they're in Derek Kendall's case, because Derek Kendall's not built to deadlift. And some lifters have a freakish deadlift and that's it, because they have the leverage to deadlift, and their deadlift is 200, sometimes even 300 pounds more than their squat, and their bench presses are crap because they're just built to deadlift, and deadlift is their circuits lift. So deadlift out of the three is the least test of strength. I would say bench is the number one test of strength if you're in Julius Maddox's case. And then number two, a close second, would be someone like Ray Williams in his 1080 squat. And then number three, in my opinion, I would say deadlift, because it's a leverage based lift. Even though if you're conventional, if you hit like a 700 conventional deadlift, you're strong. You are strong if you deadlift conventional 700. If you deadlift conventional 800, you're very strong. You're freakishly strong. 900 conventional, you're even more freakishly strong. You get to the 1000 conventional deadlift, and I say only one lifter deadlifted 1000 plus in competition conventional, and that's Benny Magnuson. He did 10-15 conventional in competition, and that's still the record to this day, and he did that 15 years ago for conventional without straps. And then you have Thor. I mean, the powerlifting world record deadlift is sumo. And then you have Thor. Thor did over 1100, but he wore deadlift suit, and he had like a whippier bar, a noodle bar to his favor, and he also wore straps. It's not the same level as when Benny pulled his 10-15, or when Andy Bolton did his 1000. The bars were not as whippy then, but I mean, no one's going to deny Thor's strength. Thor is one of the strongest humans in existence. So if you're like Thor's level of deadlift strength and total body strength when he was in his prime in strongman, or Eddie Hall being the first to do 500 kilograms on deadlift, and his static lifts he had along with the deadlift, that's also like, his he some of the strongest lifters in human history. But still, I would say the bench press, especially if you're like Joe Tamburello, pound for pound, and just his freak factor in bench. But even more so, Julius Maddox and his overall strength he has. Julius Maddox is really one of the strongest humans ever. And then Ray Williams also is one of the strongest humans ever, especially with that 1080 squat and his sheer size and strength. And then same thing with Thor. Thor's deadlift and Prime Thor and his overall strength, Prime Eddie overall strength. These are strong humans. And then some honorable mentions for strength: overhead press. And overhead press, we're looking at people like Iron Baby, who one of the strongest shoulders ever. And he has so much sheer size and mass. Yeah, fat too, but so much sheer size and mass, and some of the strongest shoulders ever. And at the end of the day, you are as strong as what you put over your head. How much you press over your head, that's how strong you are. And he strict presses well over 500 and holds the one of the overhead events, I don't remember off the top of my head, holds the record. And even someone like Andrew Richard, who on recorded camera has the highest strict overhead press with 525 pounds, and does like pump sets with 4 or 5 for like near 30 reps on the seated military press. Does strict behind the neck press 4 or 5 pounds for like 6 reps, maybe even 8 reps. And shoulder press behind the neck strict 455 for maybe a single or a double, which no one has done more than him, by the way, on the standing overhead press behind the neck. So, and those are really strong humans. And Andrew, he, beside the fact that he's like one of the strongest shoulder presses ever, and actually one of the strongest humans ever, honestly, but he would be stronger in other lifts if it weren't for his injuries. But he's just with the shoulder strength, you can't deny how freakishly strong these people are. And then people. I'm just gonna end this quick with calisthenics strength. People like Andrei Smayev, who does 200-pound, 220-pound weighted pull-ups for 17 reps, 176-pound weighted pull-ups for 30 reps. Does like 50 plus reps with his body weight. Does one-arm pull-ups with 4 reps at like over 330 pounds. Yeah, he's immensely strong on everything, and you see how massive he is. So calisthenics as well, you know. And if you haven't, and I'm just gonna end it here. Really, I made my point. So, if to summarize it, I would say the bench press, if you do freakish numbers, like maybe 400 minimum, get to 500, 600, 700, and who knows, do 800, whatever. You'll be like one of the strongest humans ever. And number 2 would be squat. Get your squat to freakish numbers, like 500 for starters. And maybe get to 600, 700, 800, 900, 1000, whatever. Or be the first to do 1100 in sleeves. And then number 3 would be deadlift. You know, just get to 700 really. Get to your first 600 for the average person. If not, then just 500 starting out. 500 deadlift starting out is like a 365 to 405 squat. It's like a 275 to 315 bench. But get to 600, 650, 675, 700, around 725, 750, 765, 785, 800. Inch your way up to 900, 1000, 1100. But yeah, that. And of course, overhead press. You know, at first, do 135 more first and foremost, and then get to like 185, which is like a 315 bench or 185 standing strict overhead or seated. Then get to like 225, inch yourself up to 275, get to 315. Once you hit 315, that's like a 450 to 500 bench, a 315 standing strict OHP, or even seated, that's like a 450 to 500 bench. And then inch yourself up to 365 or 350, and then inch yourself up to 405. Once you're 405 in the strict OHP, you're in a league of your own. That's like a 600 plus bench, 405 strict OHP, or even seated. That's like 550, 585 bench. And then of course getting to 455, 450, 500 strict OHP, then you're just on a league of your own. 500 strict OHP, standing or seated, that's like basically some of the best OHP overhead pressers in the face of the earth. And that's like the level of Julius on bench, Joe Tamburello on bench, and all the 700 plus benchers who do near 800 on bench. And then pull ups, get strong on the weighted pull up. Get to like 10 pull ups, 15 pull ups, 20 pull ups, and then, do like 100-pound weighted pull up, chin up, 135-pound weighted pull up, chin up, 150-pound weighted pull up / chin up, all the way to 180, and who knows, get to 200-pound weighted pull up / chin up, and then 225, 250. But that's the bottom of the list, because that's not as strong as the weights I mentioned for the bench, squat, deadlift, and overhead press. But you still have to be strong to do weighted chin ups with that much weight. Alright, so if you have any more questions, just leave in the comments and drop down below. I'm going to answer them. Thank you for the questions, and we'll see you next time. Peace out.